Innovation. Think back to some of your favorite games of all time, or at the very least, some of the most famous games of all time, and almost all of them have something in common. They all innovated, pushed the game industry forward, really tried to do something that no one else had done before, or at the very least, tried to do something better than everyone else. And these can be found anywhere, from the dawn of gaming to the current year. You could go as early as Mario Bros. On the NES, which basically set the gold standard for home console gaming at the time, and made every single company want to be Nintendo. You can find hundreds of cheap copies that were sold in actual gaming stores, not just bootlegs, but people trying to do what Mario did so well. And this was so successful that Mario is still one of the most recognized gaming icons ever. Super Mario 64 revolutionized 3D gaming, especially platforming, and is still considered a gold standard with its movement and fluidity. Metal Gear Solid was an innovator in storytelling and action, delivering an unforgettable movie-like experience, but also taking advantage of the gaming console part of it. Not just telling a movie-like story, but also doing things that you can't do in movies. Especially that shit with like Psycho Mantis, and he goes like, "You like Castlevania, don't you? Put your controller on the floor." In the same year that Metal Gear Solid came out, a little baby game company made this game that most people don't remember called Half-Life, which stopped the entire gaming FPS market from copying Doom for forever. Half-Life innovated by telling a story in a consistent and grounded world where the player only ever sees through their own eyes, and the player is always in control of their own actions except for the very end of the game. Specifically when G-Man is interacting with the player. It also gives you complete freedom over your actions. You can save the scientists or shoot them and make them scream. The story isn't delivered to you through text. It's all in-game and through world building. And this was such a standard setter that now it's just basic feature. Your game's kind of weird if you don't do that, unless you're making like a boomer shooter. And you can go down the list of amazing games and find this pattern of innovation consists. Halo, Left 4 Dead, Silent Hill, and Resident Evil 4 especially, Final Fantasy if you really like boring turn-based RPGs. Innovation could even be graphical quality, with games in the previous generations really trying to push for the cutting-edge graphics. This is a lot less timeless to innovate on though, unless you feel like going back and treating it like a history museum, because almost everything that somebody invents as the next cutting-edge graphics might be outdated in like 5 years. But now, we're approaching a period of gaming where graphics kind of can't get much better than they are now. Unrecord being such a realistic looking game that when it was showed off, people didn't even believe that it was a video game. They thought it was real life footage until the guy showed off the Unreal Engine 5 editor and showed that it is definitely an in-engine video game, which is probably the highest compliment that guy could have gotten, by the way. But one area hasn't been quite innovated into the fullest yet, and I feel that's physics-based games. Physics in games have been around for a long time, with the first major game I could find being 1998's Trespasser, which was like a dinosaur game and you had like a floppy arm. And it looked very ahead of its time to the point where I think it was held back by the technology of that era, because this game looks like shit. Maybe it's not actually. Surprisingly though, Valve was very impressed with Trespasser, and it was their main inspiration to make physics a big part of their next game, Half-Life 2. However, I don't consider Half-Life 2 to be a physics-based game. A physics-based game would tie its primary mechanics in gameplay into physics. Half-Life 2 has major functions tied to physics, as well as puzzles, and you got the gravity gun. But I couldn't call it the primary gameplay. Primary gameplay Half-Life 2 is usually shooting somebody. Unfortunately, most physics-based games end up using the physics in a comedy aspect rather than a serious one. One of the first mainstream games that were physics-based that I could find literally being Goat Simulator and Octodad. You've got others such as Totally Accurate Battle Simulator, Human Fall Flat, Fall Guys, Gang Beasts, Party Animals, and all of these games are delegated to comedy because making a serious physics game is very hard. How are you supposed to take a goofy ragdoll seriously? And the only other physics-based games that I can think of that are taken seriously are things like simulators, building bridges, or car games like SnowRunner. So, is there a serious capacity physics-based game out there that you can play? Is someone pushing what games are actually capable of still? And the answer is yes. Sui generis is a Latin phrase which means unique or of its own kind in a class by itself. Sui generis is the most innovative and ambitious game I think of all time. This Madoc guy, he must be some kind of like psycho super genius because he made the entire game engine from scratch. Sui Generis is an open-world RPG and is entirely physics-based with very advanced AI, and it aims to be gigantic. With dynamic lighting, weather, the engine can literally sculpt environments with procedural generation for details such as grass and trees and water. With no need to render any of this stuff out, it can be done instantly in-engine. And these features that Sui Generis showed off in 2012 are some things that Unreal Engine 5 was showing off this year in 2023. Objects in this game don't even use hitboxes. Most games have these things called hitboxes, where there's a big box around the object, or there's parts of the object that are defined on where it's supposed to collide and where it's not supposed to collide. Sui Generis has it all automated. Every object in every area, without putting any extra work in, has perfect collision, as if it's really there. I mean, you can put things in a bucket. Wow. But I hear you. How come I've never heard of Sui Generis before? And that's because Sui Generis isn't a game you can play. It's not out, despite having a successful Kickstarter back in 2012. And to explain why, we need to talk about Exanima. Exanima is a game developed by Bare Metal. It's an entirely physics-based RPG dungeon crawler. Exanima is a game that exists to make Sui Generis. With the amount of innovation that they're trying with Sui Generis, it would be foolish to jump right into making one of the most innovative games of all time, especially with an engine that is not finished and not feature complete. So we need to answer the question. Many games have physics. What makes Exanima, and by extension, Sui Generis, so special? What makes them innovative where other games are not? But first, give me 30 seconds of your time. Here's a timer. I've done high-quality videos before, but this is my first video essay, and it's where I want the channel to go in the future. I want 2024 to be my year, and I want to do better. So along with this being the new format for my channel's content, I'm opening up a Patreon so I can support myself doing this, as well as pay my editor Seaboots, who works very hard on these videos. If you would like to support me, even giving a single dollar can help a lot. Also, a subscription, a like, and a comment helps this video get thrown into the algorithm, which helps this video get discovered by other people. Apologies for the interruption, let's get back to it. The thing that makes Exanima and Sui Generis so innovative is the level of consistency and seriousness that their physics can convey, and how they tie everything into the gameplay, and how every little detail, object in the environment, every character movement, and even change in the terrain all work together to enhance the gameplay. It feels like everything in this game belongs. It's all simulated properly, giving the in-game universe a grounded and realistic feel, which also makes the game very immersive. The amount of stuff and the quality of that stuff they want in Sui Generis is massive and insane, and it would take more than 10 years to make the game if Exanima didn't exist. And this is a problem because if you have a large amount of content in the game, then you would also have to update that content as you go further into development. Imagine building a house, but then it takes you 20 years to build that house. The stuff finished last in the house is probably going to be better than the stuff finished first. I mean, look at this. The outlets aren't even fucking grounded. How am I supposed to power my 4090 RGB gamer PC? Building Exanima and spending the time to develop other gameplay in Exanima makes it a lot easier to finish Sui Generis, and they can probably finish it in a year or two once they're done with Exanima, now armed with the powerful tools that make it easy to spit out tons of high-quality content. Now, I've rambled quite a lot about this topic, but it's important you understand. Sui Generis is so insanely massive in its scope that it's basically the kind of game that you would dream about in elementary school instead of paying attention to Mrs. Clarence's English class. What the fuck is an apostrophe? So, let's talk about Exanima, because Exanima is a game you can play right now. Exanima is a dungeon crawler RPG, entirely physics-based. It's a medieval game with medieval weapons and armor and everything that comes along with that. Starting from the surface level down, this game does not aim to have realistic graphics, but it is a good-looking game. These handcrafted environments are especially detailed and littered with hundreds of objects that you'd expect to see anywhere. Cups, bowls, tables, chairs, spoons, playing cards, all of which can be knocked around and tripped over. All of the lighting is dynamic, and it's very impressive looking dynamic lighting at that. This gives each area a very realistic lighting appearance, and makes all the environments look really immersive. Each area features holes to fall in, terrain to stumble over, secrets to uncover. This is a story-based game, and a lot of these rooms are simply world building. It's not like a Diablo dungeon or a Skyrim dungeon where every room is like a place to find loot. This bathroom is just a bathroom. This is a place where they produced glass, and everything in it is glass. This is a room where they make pottery. Here's a living quarters full of people's clothes. Here's a kitchen full of plates, bowls, knives, forks, spoons. This is a bar full of cups, and there's like a little stage with a flute on it if you want to play the flute. Now, none of what I said means that there's nothing to find in these areas, but these rooms are relatively accurate. There's no special enchanted helmet underneath this plate, it's just a plate. Exanima also uses this to its advantage. Items can be hidden underneath of other items, loot and treasure are stashed away beneath bags and boxes, and don't even get me started on trying to spot these keys. You would be surprised how easy it is to not spot a dark piece of iron on a wooden table. I mean, here, take this scene right now. Spot the key in this scene. I'll give you like 5 seconds. That's right, it was here the whole time. Now, like I said, these environments are handcrafted, and they're beautiful because of it. But the items in these environments can be. The weapons and armor are all procedurally generated each time you start a new game. And all these weapons and armor pieces also come with their own set build quality, condition, modifiers such as light and heavy, even how dirty the item is. Items can also be cleaned and repaired, but you can't make a poor quality sword into a better quality sword. This is a really nice feature because this kind of puts a priority on some gear over other gear. Like, you can find a really shitty sword, but it's in perfect quality and it's clean and it's sharp. But then you find like a masterclass sword made by like a legendary blacksmith. Jesus Christ himself came down with a fucking smelting hammer and made this sword himself. But it's all rusty and it's kind of shit. But you could fix that sword and you could make it a lot better. This quality and procedural generation system also lends itself to the roguelike element that is in the game, which massively help with the replayability. Especially because this game is really hard. More on that later. Armor is also layered. You can put a shirt on, and then chainmail over that, and then like a padded coat, and then you can put some plate armor on top of that. But all these armor pieces actually only protect what it appears like they cover. A breastplate won't protect your arms, a helmet won't protect your neck, and sometimes not even your face. And weapons are also simulated realistically. Weapons generally hit hardest on the tip where they have the most leverage and speed, but something like an axe or a hammer will only deal meaningful damage if you hit with the axe part or the hammer part. This sounds really easy until you try to do it and you're fumbling around and crashing into every table, wall, and even the enemy themselves. Weapons also have damage types, being pierce, thrust, slash, crush, impact. These damage types also aren't binary. Damage types can change to other damage types in certain scenarios. Now, this game is not only really hard, it's actually also permadeath, with an asterisk. The asterisk is that there's a setting on by default called early checkpoints. I would recommend turning this setting off if you decide to play Exanima for a few reasons. While it might seem like a good idea to save yourself some frustration, you are actually cutting off some potential loot you could find to make a run special, as well as some things that make a run easier. It also compounds some of your failures that you might make on your run into a run that's very difficult to salvage or very wasteful. When you're new to a game, it's really easy to make mistakes, and making a new character rather than trying to continue an old character that you've already fucked up a bunch of times might make the new character actually easier and better in the long run than trying to scrape by with a previous character that you've already fucked up a bunch. The other reason is when I started playing Exanima back in 2015, this early checkpoint setting didn't actually exist. You don't really need it, and even to this day I really don't use it. The other benefit of keeping checkpoints off is that there's a light roguelike element in the game called Global Experience, which can get you up to 5 level up skills at the very start of your next character, giving your subsequent character a little bit of a boost to make it easier. Also, because of that procedural generation, when you make your new character, you'll be finding potentially different gear than before, with different quality and different condition, and it tends to really spice up the next run. Even though you're going through the same areas, there's new things to find. And speaking of new characters, the character creator is actually very important to the experience. Characters can be short, tall, fat, skinny, muscular, non-muscular, and it's not cosmetic. All of your movements in-game are done by muscle contractions. Unlike Grand Theft Auto 4 and its Euphoria engine, which activates like a ragdoll mode whenever the condition is met, like sometimes you shoot people and they stumble around, Exanima actually doesn't have any animations. You, yourself, are a physics object, and your muscles expand and contract to make every motion seamless. Your size and shape affects how you move, your range of motion, and how much force is behind each action. It also affects how well you balance, your point of balance, all of it. And over time, as the game is updated, these motions have become more natural and less, goofy looking. Combat is done with a combination of AI and player input. Your character will automatically attempt to keep their balance when walking on uneven ground. They don't want to trip and fall over. When an attack's coming at you, your character will try to react and block the attack. But it's not just waiting for the AI to do it, you have to aim at the weapon coming at you to attempt to block it correctly. Because this isn't an animation, you also have to be worried about how your weapon is going to move to block the attack. If you have a big, large weapon and it gets caught against the wall, or your arm can't move properly, it's going to be really hard to take that weapon and block the incoming attack with that weapon. This is different from other games where you would just transition into the blocking state. At the same time, this sort of blending technology also applies to the swings. You have to wind up and release a swing and generate power behind that swing, and hits can be direct or they can be shallow. Enemies can be too close for you to land an actual swing, and they can also move in the direction of the swing to mitigate that impact. But equally so, they could move into the swing accidentally, causing your hit to be more meaningful and do more damage. And you could even knock people off their feet with really heavy hits. And this can be assisted with both your movement and with the cursor movement, where you can throw more of your hips into the swing as well as your legs to move your whole body into the swing, putting all your weight behind it. This creates those moments where you get that really nasty hit and you just turn a guy into fucking jelly. Along with the mechanical aspect of the combat, like I listed before with Global Experience, you have learnable skills that you get as you level up. Some of these skills aren't finished yet, such as ranged combat, and some of the melee skills and shield skills aren't finished. But there is a wide selection of melee skills, shield skills, armor skills, and magic skills called Thaumaturgy. You can only have so many skills at a time, with a maximum of 5 per category, and there's also a cap on the maximum amount of skills your character can learn being 15, where no more can be learned. This means you have to decide what you want your character to be pretty early on, because leveling up these skills is quite the time investment. You can learn into melee combat, armor, and shields, or you can be more of a thaumaturge and lean into thaumaturgy. But then if you lean into thaumaturgy, you also have to decide which of these 6 branches of thaumaturgy you want to focus on. Or you can try to create like a hybrid mixture of them. But learning thaumaturge spells also requires skills to learn said spells. And this problem is only going to get worse as they add more skills into the game, but in my opinion, that's a good thing. This creates a lot of replayability, and in my opinion, creates scenarios where every single character you make can be very different from the last one, both in size, weight, the way they control, what their focus is on, and this means that no 2 characters have to be the same. You don't have to play them the same. There are a lot of ways to play this game. Combining this aspect of the game with the procedural loot and the character customization makes all these unique ways that you can try to play this game, and it opens the door for the future of this game and Sui Generis. It's also worth noting, however, that there are 2 unlockable classes, being the Peasant and the Proctor, both of which do not have full access to Thaumaturgy, like the Starting Unknown class. Thaumaturgy, as I said, is the magic system, and like I said, there are 6 branches, being Mind, Force, Body, Energy, Light, and Displacement. So far, only Mind and Force are added into the game, with Force being in the most recent 0.9 update. Mind offers you the ability to control and manipulate others. You can make enemies friendly, make them confused, make them uncontrollably angry. You can use it to mind control people. You can use it for necromancy, and you can even use it to sense people through walls, like some sort of psychic. Force is offensive magic, offering magic shields, magic blasts, and even beating somebody to death with chairs. And all the skills in the game actually level up from things beyond just killing enemies, such as exploring rooms, reading notes, interacting with things. You do get experience for killing enemies, but unless that enemy is tougher, it's a pretty negligible amount compared to just exploring the game world. Sometimes it would be better to avoid combat rather than go looking for it, especially in the early game when you aren't very well protected. And it's important because the AI in this game is very different than what you'd probably expect from a game like this. The AI in this game have a lot of interactive thoughts. They can be calm, concerned, angry, afraid. They can get confused, they can get distracted. All these AI NPCs also have their own personalities as well. Some are more hostile, some don't want to really fight at all, some are laid back, and some are anxious. And using the mind thaumaturgy, you can actually view what their emotional state is. Something I find very interesting is that a lot of these AI characters are afraid of thaumaturgy. They see you cast a purple beam and they just fuck off. I mean, if I saw somebody casting a purple beam, I would go, oh fuck, and I'd leave too. They can remember past interactions with different characters, both hostile and non-hostile, and they can build up loyalty and trust based off of those interactions. What's also impressive is that these different characters are differently skilled in combat too, and you can tell just by the way they move and the way they conduct themselves that they are more or less skilled. Killing an unskilled enemy is pretty simple, provided you're comfortable with the controls, but a skilled combatant needs to be tricked, outplayed, and needs you to actually be proficient. And this gives combat a very skill-based feel and opens the door for you to become mechanically good at it, which I tend to really like in my video games. There's a lot of stuff here I don't want to spoil, because I think telling you too much would actually jeopardize the experience slightly, especially if you haven't played this game yet. There's a lot of stuff here, and it's absolutely worth your time. But to give a brief, non-spoiler overview of the story, you are sent into, or dropped into, a dungeon with the goal of finding someone and helping them with their task, or learning what they know and returning back so you can potentially be accepted into some sort of organization. Problem is, you have partial amnesia, and you'll have to use the world building and self-discovery to relearn about your past as well as why you're here. The dungeon is a complicated mishmash of lore, where it was inhabited by a group of people, abandoned, and then re-inhabited by a new group of people after the first people had left. In the dungeon, there's also this guy named Darren. He's easy to get along with, and he's a great friend. Darren is pretty stupid, but it's nice to go through the dungeon with a friend rather than by yourself. Darren also talks to you, and having him around actually gives you unique conversations and opportunities to learn more about yourself and the world around you. Darren is also just like you, and the longer he's in the dungeon and the more he does, the better he will actually get at fighting and defending himself, so long as he doesn't die. And if he does die, well, he ain't coming back. I won't talk any more about the story, but I will say that there's a pretty big twist at the end, provided you actually pay attention to the notes that you're picking up. The story is not yet done, but I think it's safe to assume that the story is about 90% of the way done. So if you go through it all, you're pretty much only missing the final chapter. Another thing I haven't mentioned is that I've only been talking about the story mode. This game actually has 2 arena modes. One of them is the practice dungeon, and yes, I highly recommend you spend a lot of time in here if you want to learn and get better at the combat. It's really hard to get your bearings and learn the controls, but having a risk-free environment where you can try and improve without losing hours of progress in the dungeon is a very nice thing. There's also the career arena mode, which allows you to hire fighters and fight in organized battles for money. Then with that money, you can also buy gear from a rotating shop where bad and good items cycle in, at different qualities and different conditions. And the end goal is winning these seasonal tournaments, where you can win some really cool, high-quality weapons, as well as if you win multiple tournaments in a season, you can win these, like, hyper-decorated armor sets, which basically look like you're whipping out your massive cock and you're waving it around in front of everybody and going, "Oh, look at me, I'm way cooler than you are." I think the arena mode is a great way to waste some time, and I spent a lot of hours into it, but I don't find it nearly as engaging as the story mode for obvious reasons. It's definitely a fun time sink though. The thing that makes this game innovative is how it beautifully blends credible AI, beautiful environments, in-depth combat, and uses physics to enhance the gameplay. Also, the music in Exanima is very good. You've been hearing it this whole time. It makes the combat better to have a physics system at all, injecting both comedic aspects and even more fearful aspects. Never before has a game attempted to be this in-depth with its physics system and use that for its core gameplay. And Bare Metal's approach to game development is as masterful as it is a curse. And here we come to, in my opinion, the only major problem with Exanima and Sui Generis, is that it's been in development for a very long time. It's been a very slow process. I bought this game back in 2015, and it's still not done. But that's not to say the game is in development hell. For example, the 0.9 update actually came out on October 13th, only a few weeks before writing this video. And each update they do push out is always massive in scope and has a lot of gigantic improvements and content added onto it. I have never been underwhelmed by an Exanima update. I also don't find too many bugs in this game either. It generally runs pretty smoothly, and it's very well optimized, and I think it can run on most people's hardware. With that said, these updates are slow, and for the people who kickstarted Sui Generis all the way back in 2012, the wait has been immense. While a lot of games are happy to stagnate and push out the same game over and over again under new skins, Exanima and Sui Generis are pushing things forward by a lot. And I think once this game takes off, and I do think it's going to explode in popularity one day, the industry is going to take notice across the indie scene as well as the higher budget AA and AAA studios, especially when it comes to little things that make this game special and the unconventional approach to how things are handled, with things like no animations, no traditional hitboxes, their own unique AI system that's complicated and spontaneous. It's like Bare Metal is trying to reinvent the wheel, except that it's actually good. I think Exanima and Sui Generis are going to be masterclass games once they're complete. This isn't a small thing after all. Not only is this potentially one of the greatest medieval games I've ever played, it's also potentially my favorite game ever, which is no small feat because I have high taste in games and I value quality and integrity a lot. So much so that I can even label myself as a gaming snob. My favorite games are usually the ones that are those 10 out of 10 masterpieces, and I think this one fits right into that category, and I can only pray that they actually finish it.